Thank you very much, Ben. That was a fascinating talk, and it's great to see how this sort of project really can benefit the community. I'd like to go now to our next speaker. It's Kai Wallace from AOC. It's going to be speaking to us today about the later prehistoric settlement at Castlemains, Dirleton.
Yeah, good morning. So my name is Kai Wallace and I'm a project officer with AOC Archaeology Group. So I'm here to talk about archaeological works carried out in late 2020 and early 2021 in land immediately east from Dirleton Castle, which was ahead of a residential development, and the works were commissioned by M&M Developments. So the works consisted of an initial 8% evaluation by trial trenching, followed by a topsoil strip over an excavation in 3 areas, which revealed 2 well-preserved roundhouse structures and a large ditch feature interpreted as possibly medieval. So the proposed development site consisted of a 4.1 hectare sub-rectangular land parcel bounded by the A198 to the south, Castlemains Place to the north, with North Berwick to the east and Gullen to the west. The soils within the site were a soft, dark, red-brown sandy silt with depths of topsoil measured between 0.3 and 1 metre. The natural subsoil was primarily gravel and sands, and which had clearly been softened by years of heavy ploughing for potatoes and turnips. East Lothian is formed of gently undulating land bounded by the Lammermuir Hills to the south and the coastal region to the north. Its extremely fertile soils lay over superficial alluvial deposits in carboniferous shales, sandstones and limestones. So the region has been settled and farmed for millennia, with the earliest evidence being that of the Mesolithic house discovered by AOC at East Barnes Ness, near Dunbar. So a later Mesolithic activity in form of flint scatters has also been recorded during extensive works during the A1 upgrade between Dunbar and Haddington. Also discovered during these works were timber structures and pit alignments dating to the 4th millennium BC. Which is kind of the earliest evidence of the definition and dividing the landscape. East Lothian is home to some of the richest evidence for later prehistoric sites within the majority of identified as Cropmarks. So the Canmore database suggests 226 enclosed sites belonging to the later prehistoric periods, which they've defined as 1200 BC to AD 200, with 96% of this total identified as Cropmarks only. Surprisingly few unenclosed settlement sites are presumed to be later prehistoric, with only 38 recorded Cropmarks suggested as being roundhouse sites across the region. These include the Cropmarks of 3 seemingly isolated roundhouses known as Craigie Law near Aberlady, Harperdeen, Haddington, and Blacklock near Spot beside Dunbar. So it is worth mentioning at this point that the intensity of modern land improvement across the region through ploughing and drainage has obviously clearly impacted many upstanding and buried sites, and thus the Cropmark record will obviously not give an accurate perspective of the amount of settlement across the region, but nevertheless it does paint a useful picture. So in regards to the immediate area of Castlemains site at Dirleton, the most prominent prehistoric site is the volcanic mound of North Berwick Law, which is 3 kilometres to the east, and which overlooks the site. The summit of the hill was the site of an Iron Age hill fort, containing hut circles and enclosures. So the prominent nature of the law, like Treprain to the south and its panoramic views in all directions, suggests it would be a major focus within the landscape for people living on the law itself and the communities surrounding it. Around 4 miles south of the site, near Chester's Hill Fort, multiple Cropmarks have been identified, including pit alignments and settlement evidence, including an Iron Age ring roof, roundhouse at New Mains discovered near the site of a hoard of bronze objects. The excavations of this, I think around the 70s, revealed a 7 metre diameter house in association with paved and cobbled areas, pottery, quernstone, slag, work bone objects, and considerable quantities of animal bone and seashells. There are also a number of fairly large enclosures closer to our site, including Kilmurdy Fort, which is located 2.5 kilometres to the southeast and consists of a multi-valet fort set over a low knoll presumed to be Iron Age. Multiple small circular Cropmarks close to Kilmurdy are listed in the Canmore directory as undated dwellings, but they do appear to represent isolated roundhouses, including another site called Newhouse. So other known Cropmarks to the immediate north of the site are thought to be field boundaries of a possible prehistoric date. So reaching out in the wider landscape, some of the more known prehistoric sites in East Lothian include Traprain Law, which was the hill fort site settled during the Bronze Age and throughout the Iron Age. Other hill fort and settlement sites on the coastal region of East Lothian include Broxmouth, Dryburn Bridge, St Germains, East Barnes and Salters Road near Walliford, which have all been archaeologically excavated. So the area where East Lothian and Midlothian is perhaps one of the busiest areas in terms of later prehistoric activity, with settlement enclosures, systems, pit groups and alignments frequent. So Midlothian sites are obviously more frequently observed due to increased development closer to the central belt and increased aerial patrols. So this is just a really quick look at the Canmore Airborne mapping system, which would show you how busy a place this sort of area was over the millennia, with a focus likely being the River Esk. Our initial evaluation was carried out in December 2020, with 20 trenches excavated across the site, totaling around 1,400 linear metres, with some additional boxing out for features. Frustratingly, some areas were out of bounds due to the usual constraints, in this case the electric overhead wires and a large, deep and still live Victorian drain. A number of fairly localised features were identified across the site, but our attentions were focused upon Trench 6 on the central eastern side of the field, where a small postal and softly curved and narrow ditch were observed. That's the photo on the top left. To the west of this, we hit what was quite clearly a curvilinear ditch running in and out of Trench 22, and seems to be enclosed in a small pit or postal. So a very fortunately placed slot in the curvilinear revealed a nice ring groove ditch, which seemed to house a nicely cut postal. So we extended some of these trenches and revealed and found further possible features. At that point, it was quite obvious we were dealing with a roundhouse or a barrow type feature. Heading further west on the site, there was a number of trenches went through large, irregular and deep features, which were initially interpreted as landscaping, as depicted in historic maps. So we headed back at the start of 2021 to complete topsoil strip in 3 areas, with area 1 and 2 containing roundhouse and a small number of pits, and area 3 containing the large ditch that was just mentioned. So in area 1, we exposed a fairly well intact roundhouse with 11 post holes and an associated ring groove ditch. The roundhouse contained a central post string of 8 post holes, which created an internal diameter measuring approximately 7 metres. The post holes were pretty standard, circular or subcircular in plan, with steep sloping sides onto flat bases. The other post holes were set outside the main post string, suggesting an internal structure feature located between the main house and the ring groove ditch. A 5 metre space between post holes 3 and 17 appeared to represent the entrance to the main house area, positioned slightly offset from a 2.8 metre wide break in the ring groove ditch, which was facing west. The ring groove itself was really well defined and sub-oval in plan, and slots through the ditch all produced steep sloping or near vertical sides onto flat bases. Post holes and ring grooves were filled with fairly homogeneous deposits of silty sands and flecks of charcoal. No obvious post pipes were observed in any of these sections, suggesting the timbers may have been removed rather than rotten or burnt in situ. There were occasional packing stones noted in some of the post holes and ring groove slots, but these stones were generally pretty small. So this is Roundhouse 2. It's located 90 metres west from Roundhouse 1 and was similar in form and contained a central ring of gain of 8 posts, which measured 6 metres in diameter, with 1 additional post hole appearing to deviate from the main post string. Again, the house was surrounded by a well-defined sub-oval ring groove ditch. The post hole profiles were fairly similar to Roundhouse 1, but averaged slightly larger in width and shallower in depth, which possibly suggests more plough truncation in that area. The most centrally positioned post hole, which is also the largest of the post cuts, seemed to reflect the position of a post hole placed into the ring groove slot D that we mentioned earlier. And slot D was actually the only slot to produce any signs of post holes within the ditch. So the Roundhouse 2 ring groove was closely comparable in dimensions to Roundhouse 1, but slightly less circular in plan, with an almost straight eastern edge near slot B, which is on the eastern side. So excavated slots produced generally similar U-shaped profiles to Roundhouse 1, but there was more in the way of a V-shaped profile in some of the slots. A double gap between slot A and H on the southeast side of the house was also separated by what appeared to be an almost elongated pit feature. This area was noted as very soft during the archaeological works, and two large stones shown in the top right corner, these were dislodged from this area during the evaluation. So it seems plausible these two stones may have been positioned as a kind of threshold or step into the house area, and due to the fact the ground seemed very soft here, may have played a double role to create a harder surface for accessing the house. So if this theory is accepted, then it also seems likely that the feature interpreted as an elongated pit is actually part of a continuation of the ring groove slot and may have contained a large postal related to the position of the entrance doorway. So again, the deposits within both postals and the ring groove ditch in Roundhouse 2 were homogeneous, fairly homogeneous, with more charcoal noted in the postals rather than the ring groove ditch, although some larger stones in the ditch may be scant evidence of packers. There were no signs of an internal hearth feature or floor deposits in Roundhouse 2, but this is commonplace for this type of proud plough truncated site. Unfortunately, finds were frustratingly lacking, but we did recover that very nice saddle rubber quern, which is found immediately outside of the western side of House 2. The quern was really well worn and dished on its face. The stone was seemed to be a large water-worn cobble and was very different in form and size compared to other sites on the Roundhouse. So it's worth considering some of the similarities and differences between the two structures. Both Roundhouse post string structures were formed of 8 posts, which were uniformly set out, measuring about between 1.5 to 2 metre spacings, with a post string diameter measuring between 6 and 7 metres, and the largest of the posts being the centrally located cuts. So if we consider the distance between the ring groove and the inner post string, which were similar with both houses, this suggests a similar type of wall or roof structure in use. Posts set closer to the centre could often signify a heavier roof in place, such as thatch. The space between the ring groove and post string was very similar in both houses, measuring 2 metres, and this would have been ample room for storage or livestock per se. As mentioned, the deposits of both roundhouses, postals and ring groove ditch were relatively sterile and mostly seem to represent redeposited natural soils and likely placed back in after construction with some organic build-up present. So it is difficult to say, much certainty at this point, if this in any way represents differences between the length of occupation or dates of the house, and the main fact simply reflect residual material entering these features. A phase of post-ex analysis is due to be carried out next year, so this will obviously help to answer questions such as this. So if we accept the initial interpretation of the entrance for Roundhouse 1 as west facing and Roundhouse 2 as southeast facing, then perhaps another similarity is the presence of a double set of fairly irregular pits, which were set away from each house but seem to be bang in line with the entrances. So the 2 pits near Roundhouse 1 were elongated, with one of them containing a humic fill and charcoal staining, which did appear as an in situ rotted post, and which may represent a post construct for hanging items such as hay. One of the pits near Roundhouse 2 was again elongated, almost kidney bean shaped, and contained a significant amount of water-worn cobbles pressed into the sides to possibly to create a stone lining, which could have been used for storage. So another set of seemingly double pits was located slightly further southeast from Roundhouse 2, and these pits also contained a similar dark grey purple coloured humic fill. So again, it's difficult to say for certain on the pit's uses and if they were in fact related to the presence of the houses, but it does seem likely based on the proximity. And it is interesting that the majority of the pits seem to contain organic or humic fill and placed as double pits. So there are also slight variations seen in the Roundhouse plans, but these are perhaps minor, such as the overall shape of the ring groove, with Roundhouse 1 appearing slightly more oval in regards to the post string structure and seemingly more off-centre in relation to the ring groove opening. Perhaps the main difference with the Roundhouse is accepting the position of the entrances, which have been interpreted as strikingly different based on the position of a gap in the ring groove and the widest point between the post string cuts. So the Roundhouse 1 entrance appeared to be set west based on this gap between the ring groove, and the postals set away from the main post string do vaguely represent a porch area, which may have faced southeast, which obviously could suggest this was the original roundhouse entrance. However, it may also be the case that these post holes are not related to a porch, but just represent internal architectural furnishings, additional supports or renovations or repairs. A southeast aligned entrance is certainly a common tradition, but not exclusive within roundhouse construction. The practical aspects obviously provide protection from southwesterly winds and maximise sunlight infiltration based on a mid-winter solstice. West-facing doorway is also known and sometimes found to be in association with a secondary entrance. So the idea of a secondary entrance to Roundhouse 1 is worthwhile consideration. Examples of this are known at Iron Age sites such as Weirstone Road, which was excavated by AOC and contained at least 3 ring groove houses. The Roundhouse 2 construction seemed to conform to the southeast entrance in regards to both house and the post ring and ring groove openings. Other than the possible porch and possibility of a second entrance, there did not seem to be extensive evidence for modifications or multi-phase use of the houses, and this may in itself be significant and reflect the length of the occupation in the houses, in this case perhaps being relatively short-lived. So while it is difficult to establish these 2 houses were contemporary or of similar uses, it seems likely based on proximity and construction style at this point. So the 2 roundhouses at Dirleton are very typical of post-ring and ring groove structures, which are interpreted as a phenomenon originating in the Bronze Age and continuing right throughout the Iron Age. So the presence of the surrounding ring groove ditch is often associated with a ring beam style construction, which involves the main weight of the building loaded onto the inner post string. An outer wall would be positioned within the ring groove slot and be much less substantial in terms of load bearing and may have housed wattle and daub panels. So during the excavation, there were some small fragments of daub retrieved from the slots in the Roundhouse 2 ditch. So this could be scant evidence of this. Dates recovered from a ring groove structure at Lamb's Nursery near Dalkeith placed its construction within the Middle Bronze Age. The earliest phasing of settlement at St Germain's near Longridge, which involves successive ring groove constructions, was interpreted to belong to the Late Bronze Age to Early Iron Age. This was also the case at Castlesteads near Dalkeith, and as you can see, the southern house bears a fair resemblance to our Roundhouse 2. Similar to ring ditch houses, ring groove sites become increasingly frequent during the transition into the Iron Age and become a typical later prehistoric construction. Evidence from other excavated sites throughout the Lothians does seem to confirm this too, with sites including the 2 houses at Dryburn Bridge and Melbourne Nurseries producing very similar dates situated in the early part of the 1st millennium BC. At Broxmouth near Dunbar, the earliest ring groove house number 3 was dated to the end of the 1st millennium BC, with successive houses such as House 2 dated between the 1st and 3rd centuries AD. So as mentioned, the roundhouse at Newmains was dated to the later part of the Iron Age. So these findings add to a growing number of houses dated to the latter end of the Iron Age, including structures in Angus and Camelon near Falkirk, showing that it was a long continued tradition of construction. Some of the known ring groove sites in the Lothians are often associated, at least within close proximity, to post or pit alignments, which are predominantly thought to reflect later prehistoric activities of demarcation and enclosing of the landscape. Sites in the Lothians such as Thornybank and Castlesteads are good examples of this, as is the Newmains site in East Lothian. So many ring groove structures are also found within larger enclosures such as St Germain's and Dryburn Bridge and Broxmouth, but the surrounding enclosure systems are thought to have been established later than the original construction of the ring grooves themselves. The site at Dirleton did not appear to be related to a wider enclosure by ditch, although a ditch was found on the western side of the site in Area 3, but this appeared to relate to the evidence of the castle based on its alignment, size and medieval ceramics coming out of its fill. Certainly, with viewing the available aerial imagery of the site itself, there was no sign of the 2 identified houses or any additional features that could be seen. But the fields immediately northeast, which is the top right corner, top right photo, sorry, did contain ploughed out field boundaries among other smaller linear and curvilinear features. Although not recorded, there are a number of linear features present in the field immediately south from the site, which could quite easily be evidence of pit alignments or ditches. When viewing the Canmore Airborne maps close to the site, which is the top left photo, there are a number of undated circular features which look suspiciously like roundhouses, including one named New House, which does appear as a ring groove style house and is located less than a kilometre away. This again further suggests the houses at Dirleton are part of a much wider spread later prehistoric settlement across the coastal region. So a quick conclusion. The works undertaken at Castlemains Dirleton produced two lovely examples of ring groove roundhouse construction, which at this point represents small scale and unenclosed settlement. Although we have no confirmation by radiocarbon at this point, the houses seem to fit in nicely with the wider scale later prehistoric settlements seen in other parts of East Lothian and Midlothian. Our first interpretation is the houses may represent short-lived settlement based on the relatively sterile nature of the deposits found and apparent lack of finds and sort of major modification to the structures themselves. As suggested, it may be the case that the two houses were settled one after the other in quick succession. Also seems likely that these two houses are part of a wider landscape which relates to nearby Cropmarks. Certainly ring groove structures are also considered slight in regards to their physical presence within the ground. So it also seems plausible that despite good coverage of the site, additional houses may have been present within the field or close to it, being either wholly truncated or it might, and likely in the off-limits corridor where the services are located, which is often the case. So to wrap it up, I'd just like to thank our client, M&M Developments, for their cooperation through both phases of work, to my colleagues Alex Woods and Lindsay Dunbar for helping with the excavation, and to the guys here for inviting me to tell you about the site. Thanks for listening.